This is a view along the East River in New York City near today's Pier 36 at the foot of Montgomery Street in Manhattan. In the 19th century, there was a series of commercial piers here numbered differently than they are today, and on this approximate location was Pier 50. On November 5, 1872, a 103-foot-long sailing ship, a brigantine called the Mary Celeste, left the dock at this location on a voyage bound for Genoa, Italy. On or about November 25th, 148 years ago this week, out in the eastern part of the North Atlantic, something happened to this ship that remains mysterious. In fact, the Mary Celeste mystery is probably the most well-known maritime mystery of modern times, and there's been a lot of speculation about it, most of it completely ridiculous. In this video, we'll examine the classic mystery of the sea and hope to answer the question, what really happened to the Mary Celeste? I'm Sean Munger. I am a historian and I teach history courses online. You can see what I've got on my website, seanmunger.com. I've got a free webinar coming up on December 22nd called How Historical is Indiana Jones? And if you click on courses offered, you'll see the history courses I've got on offer right now. I've got a course on the Vietnam War, another one on understanding Vladimir Putin, and a free course on the Pearl Harbor attack. The Mary Celeste, probably the most famous ghost ship of all time, is a complicated topic. Numerous books have been written about this event, most of them useless, a few of them very good. There's no way that I can hope to cover everything relevant about the ship in this short video, but I'm going to try my best to hit the highlights. The Mary Celeste was a cargo ship, and the voyage on which she departed on November 5, 1872, was purely a commercial one. The cargo was 1,701 barrels of alcohol, what they call denatured alcohol, which means it had been treated to be toxic so that people couldn't drink it. The alcohol was probably destined for factories in Europe to be used in some sort of industrial process. The ship was under the command of Benjamin Spooner Briggs, 37 years old, from Marion, Massachusetts, and a seasoned commercial mariner. Briggs was devoutly Christian, a Congregationalist in the good New England tradition, and a teetotaler. He was nervous at carrying alcohol on board. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, and their daughter, Sophia, just a baby, were also on board. The Briggses also had a son, Arthur, who luckily did not go on the voyage. The Mary Celeste sailed out into the open ocean on November 7th. A little less than a month later, on December 4th, 1872, she was spotted on the horizon by another ship, the Dei Gratia, sailing erratically westward, the wrong direction. Because I love to use Google Maps, I'll show you the exact position where the ship was found. Here it is. About 430 miles due west of Lisbon, Portugal, almost an equal distance east of the Azores. She was headed for Genoa, Italy in the Mediterranean, but she would have had to enter the Mediterranean at Gibraltar, about 635 miles east-southeast of the position where she was found. Men from the Dei Gratia boarded the Mary Celeste. Exactly what they found on board has been disputed and clouded, but here's what we know from the historical record. The ship's rudder was intact, some of the sails were tattered and flapping. The Mary Celeste had carried one boat usually, but that was missing. Notably, a couple of ropes, lines they call them at sea, were hanging off the ship and dragging into the water. One of them was a large line called the main peak halyard, which was found broken off. The wheel wasn't lashed, which you would do if you were setting a ship on sort of automatic pilot. The captain's chronometer, sextant, the navigation book, the register, and the ship's commercial papers all were gone. The logbook, however, was still there. It was in the first mate's cabin. The final log entry, a routine notation of position, was dated 8 o'clock a.m. on November 25th. There was also a map on the wall of the mate's cabin showing a plotting of the ship's course. The last marking was November 24th, seemed routine. It was more than 350 miles from where the ship was eventually found on December 4th. In the captain's cabin, they found the bed unmade, a woman's dress draped over a chair, and a child's toys stacked in the corner. But no sign of Briggs, his family, or anyone else. Various legends and subsequent accounts have it that there was food sitting out on the table in the galley as if the crew had just been sitting down to breakfast. That is not true. The food was all stowed. There's also reports that the stove in the galley was still warm. That's nonsense, of course. The ship had been abandoned by this time for many days. As for the crew's quarters, their valuables and clothes, including heavy weather gear, were all still there. They even left their tobacco pipes behind. Sailors tended to smoke a lot in the late 19th century. 2 hatch covers had been taken off. On a cargo ship of this nature, there were large openings heading down into the hold. These hatches were normally covered with wood or canvas, and these were found laying on the deck near the hatches. There was a lot of water sloshing around in the ship, but it wasn't sinking. The hull was completely intact. The water probably came in from the sloshing of waves across the bow and possibly rain in the several days that it seemed the ship had been sailing unmanned. Also, several doors and windows aboard the ship were open, as was a skylight. These are all important clues. Another important clue is this one. After the Dei Gratia brought the Mary Celeste into Gibraltar, where every inch of the ship was checked, the hold and its cargo were finally examined, and eventually the cargo was shipped on to Genoa, which was its original destination. A letter from O.M. Spencer, U.S. Consul at Genoa, to the U.S. Consul in Gibraltar, dated April 26, 1873, read, quote, "There were landed 1,701 barrels of alcohol agreeing with the bills of lading, 9 of which were empty, a not unusually large number. Proof 93.35, specific gravity 0.815. The cargo came out in excellent condition, so much so that the consignee who wished to relinquish it in favor of underwriters could find no excuse for doing so." End quote. So you got that 1,701 barrels of alcohol, 9 of which were found empty. That was thought not to be unusual attrition on a voyage like this. So a total of 10 people are missing, 7 members of the Mary Celeste's crew, plus Briggs, his wife, and baby daughter. Numerous accounts give the number of crew members as 13, probably because it sounds spooky, but it's nonsense. There were 7 crew, plus the captain, and 2 passengers. 10 people, one of them a 2-year-old baby. So there's the mystery. What could have caused these 10 people to abandon their perfectly seaworthy ship in the middle of the North Atlantic? The theories are legion. To be honest, most of them are kind of stupid. There was an inquest in Gibraltar in December 1872, just after the ship was brought in. You can find all kinds of accounts of the testimony at this proceeding. A lot of it has been distorted or even fabricated. The British authorities in Gibraltar seemed to favor some kind of foul play theory, and they investigated conjectures about the crew being a bunch of rowdy cutthroats. A sword was found on the floor of one of the cabins. There was a lot of talk at the inquest and afterward about what appeared to be bloodstains on it, and other supposed indications of violence like axe chops in the woodwork and such. As it turned out, the stuff on the sword was tested and found not to be blood. Subsequent examinations of the Mary Celeste found no indications at all of slash marks or any other kind of evidence of violence. Some writers riffing on this theory suggest that the crew got trashed on the alcohol in the hold, staged a mutiny, and took over the ship. And then what? Abandoned it themselves? Not only does this ignore the fact that the alcohol carried aboard the Mary Celeste was not drinkable and deliberately manufactured to be not drinkable, but in fact this theory solves nothing, because now you have to explain why the mutineers abandoned ship and why they did it while leaving all their valuables behind. Pirates were a big deal in popular consciousness in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, still today, so naturally a lot of explanations center around this idea. Again, you've got problems with the pirate hypothesis. Yes, there were pirates who sometimes preyed on shipping in the eastern Atlantic in the 1870s, but pirates are motivated by profit. Again, valuables were left behind, including 1,701 cases of alcohol. So what, they just attacked the ship just for the hell of it, threw everybody overboard and sailed away? Not too likely. Where's the profit in that? Pirates, as it turns out, are a pretty poor explanation for nautical-themed mysteries. There's more than enough illogical nonsense about pirates in the Oak Island story that I debunked back in 2017, and occasionally pirates make their way into the Mac Graham, Palmyra Island, and Seawind mystery, which I've also done on this channel. Most people who suggest pirates as an answer to these sorts of things don't know that much about piracy or even how it works on a basic level. So sorry, Jack Sparrow, but there's no pirates here. A lot of the nonsense surrounding the Mary Celeste was ignited by a short story published in 1884, written by British adventure and mystery writer Arthur Conan Doyle, who at that time had not yet created his most enduring character, Sherlock Holmes. The story, intended as fiction, involves a surly crewman who incites a mutiny and brings the ship to West Africa for some racially motivated killings. This casually racist story didn't manage to get even one major fact of the real event correct. In 1913, another hoax, the infamous Abel Fosdyke Papers, was published in a popular magazine. The account of supposedly the sole survivor of the ship, whose name conveniently never appears on any crew list, this hoax told a ludicrous story of a swimming platform built over the deck, passengers and crew getting eaten by sharks, and a deathbed confession by the aforementioned Mr. Fosdyke, all complete crap, of course, but many people did believe it at the time, and some still do. Don't even get me started on the explanations involving UFOs or the Bermuda Triangle. The Mary Celeste was abandoned hundreds of miles away from the Bermuda Triangle, which itself is a pop culture fabrication. There's nothing to it. So what did happen? Well, the most logical explanations involve those 9 empty casks of industrial alcohol. We know you couldn't drink it, so we're not talking about people getting drunk and doing dumb things, but they must have leaked somehow. And if among 1,701 casks you've only lost 9 on a transatlantic voyage in a 103-foot sailing ship in the late fall and heavy weather, you're not doing too badly. The weather was bad during the Mary Celeste voyage, by the way. We know that because of the logs of other ships that were out there at that same time, including the Dei Gratia. In fact, there are records of the weather changing very suddenly off the Azores on November 25th, the exact day that we think the Mary Celeste was abandoned. For any serious student of this mystery, this is the best book written on the subject, The Story of the Mary Celeste by Charles Ede Fay, originally published by the Peabody Museum in 1942. This is a reprint, but it collects many of the major primary source documents, especially those produced at the inquest in Gibraltar, and it cuts through a lot of the crap. Charles Fay worked for the insurance company that originally insured the Mary Celeste back in 1872, and he had access to company records. Fay suggests that the alcohol casks either gave off fumes in the hold or were leaking. Temperature and atmospheric conditions could have contributed to this. As the Mary Celeste sailed through heavy weather, having to do so with all our hatch covers closed, all the windows sealed up and such, there might have been a buildup of alcohol fumes in the hold. Something, perhaps the metal hoops on the casks rubbing against each other, produced a spark which ignited the fumes. An explosion then rocked the ship, not enough to cripple it, but powerful enough to blow the covers off the cargo hatches, which, as you recall, were found on the deck. Fearing another explosion, Briggs would have ordered company and crew to get into the boat, which they towed behind the ship on that large rope, the main peak halyard. As they were riding behind the ship, a gust of wind came up, the rope snapped, they couldn't catch up. Then imagine whatever horrible fate was suffered by those 10 people bobbing around in a little tiny boat, watching their now empty ship sail away from them over the horizon. The chief objection to this theory is that the Dei Gratia sailors found no evidence of a flash fire or an explosion aboard the Mary Celeste. Nothing was scorched or burnt. An explosion powerful enough to blow off the hatch covers would have left traces, right? Plus, if alcohol fumes were building up, wouldn't the salvage crew have smelled them? As it turns out, not necessarily. In 2006, researchers at the University College of London tested this theory by building a scale model of the Mary Celeste's hold, filling it with gaseous butane and igniting it. It did explode, of course, but it left no scorching or burning, instead creating a pressure wave type of explosion. The mock hold was filled with cubes made of ordinary paper, which wasn't even singed by the explosion. I'll put a link in the description to the article about this. The UCL researchers triumphantly claim that this experiment solved the Mary Celeste mystery. I'm not sure I'm going to go that far, but it is very interesting. There's also the issue that if you really stop and look at the evidence, it doesn't appear that the ship was abandoned hastily in a panic. Although the logbook and certain records were left behind, others were taken, so they were obviously collected. The crew did not take heavy weather gear like raincoats with them. They didn't bring survival rations, and they left their tobacco pipes behind. But that doesn't necessarily indicate a hasty abandonment. Indeed, it looked like the crew expected that they would be coming back, and very shortly. If they thought there was even a reasonable chance that the ship would have to be abandoned permanently, such as it was going to explode, wouldn't they have taken at least some food and survival gear with them? Remember, the captain has his wife and 2-year-old daughter on board. He's going to do absolutely everything possible to guarantee their safety. A more recent book, more recent than Charles Fay anyway, called Ghost Ship by South Carolina journalist Brian Hicks, walks back the alcohol explosion theory in a way that I think absolutely fits the facts that we know. According to Hicks, there wasn't an explosion at all, or even a realistic fear of one. Rather, there was a nuisance. This theory also hinges on the leaking alcohol casks and the bad weather. So let's say that the fumes have been building up throughout the whole voyage. They can't open the hatches or the windows because of the heavy weather that they're sailing through. The whole ship stinks like alcohol. This goes on for days. Maybe people are being affected by it or passing out or whatever. Finally, on November 25th, the weather lifts. Again, we know that there was a period of calm in the weather on that day because of the logs of other ships. So Captain Briggs decides to seize on his chance to air out the ship. He orders the hatch covers, the skylight, and all the other doors and windows to be opened. They have to get off the ship rather than merely just opening everything up and coming on deck because they're becalmed. There's no wind to carry away the fumes. The fumes will just sit there all around them, and perhaps people are passing out, as I said, or something like that. So the crew in this instance would have left their pipes and their smoking stuff stowed, probably with all the fumes aboard the ship suffusing the whole ship. They were probably ordered not to smoke. So they get in the boat towed by the main peak halyard. They expect to be gone maybe an hour or so, not very long, but during the time they're riding behind the ship, the weather suddenly changes. The wind comes up, catches the Mary Celeste's sails, and the tow rope snaps. Game over, man. The only piece of evidence that this theory does not explain is why the wheel wasn't lashed. Briggs should have made sure that that was done before they stepped off the ship. For some reason we can't know he didn't do that. But all the other facts that we do know to be true are consistent with this theory. Folks, I'm pretty sure this is what happened to the Mary Celeste. We don't need pirates. We don't need crazed, drunken mutineers. We sure as hell don't need UFOs of the Bermuda Triangle or a mysterious explosion that leaves no trace. All we need are some alcohol fumes, a sudden change in the weather, which we know is likely to have happened, and one bad decision. That's all we need to solve this 148-year-old mystery. Incidentally, what eventually happened to the Mary Celeste herself is a pretty interesting story in its own right. She was returned to service and eventually sank in the Caribbean in 1885 under, let's say, questionable circumstances. I might do another video on that, but for now, let's consider this one, the 1872 disappearance mystery, very likely to have been solved. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff that you normally do for a video that you like. And I'll be back again at another time with another historical thought. Thanks.